and I won't back down. Hey, baby, there ain't no easy way out.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us right here on The Right View. You are going to love this show. But before we start tonight, I want to tell you about one of our sponsors very quickly, Balance of Nature. If you know anything about me, you know that I take my health very seriously. In fact, with each year that passes, the goal of staying in my healthiest and best shape takes on more and more importance. Feeling good is something that I don't take for granted. It's become an essential goal for me every single day. That's why I always remember to take Balance of Nature supplements. Balance of Nature receives over 1,000 success stories every single month. They have hundreds of thousands of customers who've purchased billions of capsules of their fruits and veggies over the past 20 years. Their products are gluten-free and non-GMO, and they contain no added sugars or synthetics. I think if you're looking for something to make you feel better naturally, give Balance of Nature a try. In fact, you can order today and check it all out on their website. Whether you order online or call them directly, you can use the promo code LARA to get a special offer of 35% off. Call them at 800-246-8751 and use discount code LARA, or order them online at balanceofnature.com with discount code LARA to get 35% off. If getting more serious about your health is something you've been wanting to commit to, I highly recommend you check out Balance of Nature. Tonight, we're joined by a name that I think has become very familiar to a lot of people out there, and maybe you finally learned how to pronounce it, ladies and gentlemen. Former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek, I said to you before the show, I mean, you are all over the place. You must have been everywhere, talked to everybody. Your life has been a little bit crazy as of late, but I want to ask you first and foremost, was I or was I not the first Trump that you actually knew yourself?
You know, I actually think you were, now that you mentioned
see?
that. Absolutely. Yeah, because this was years ago, actually. This is back to when I was still, I think I was in my CEO I was transitioning out of my time as a CEO back then. So yes, actually you were.
Yeah, the last time you and I this is our second interview. The first time you actually were interviewing me for your project Woke Inc. at Fox. I mean, how have things been since the interview? You've had a little bit of change in your life,
I've had a little bit of
say.
change. Although I think a lot of it even related to what we spoke about back then. I remember there was some dose of controversy out of something completely uncontroversial that came out of our conversation about what I think you framed as the decline of Western civilization in the face of what then was this newly ascendant woke culture.
Right.
And I think that was one of those moments where you're not really supposed to use words like Western civilization in the midst of a 2020, 2021 post-George Floyd world. So anyway, it was an interesting time when you and I sat down then. My life has been, I'm in a completely different world now than I was in my time in the business world. I was busy building businesses. I was an entrepreneur. I ended up actually stepping down from my career as a CEO in part because of what I saw as this new cultural infection in corporate America. I built a multi-billion-dollar company. There's a demand that I make a statement on behalf of Black Lives Matter after George Floyd dies. I asked myself why I would do that. I refused to. That created a bunch of controversy that then caused me to step down from my job as a CEO and move on to speaking out about a lot of this cancer that was spreading across one institution to another. But in my own life, one thing led to another. I wrote Woke Inc., and then I wrote 2 books that followed that. I got a little bit sick of writing books in the sense that, I love writing books, but I don't like just observing a problem. I like doing something to solve it. I started another company called Strive to compete against BlackRock, but I realized that the head of the snake, the real ultimate problem, started with the deep state and the federal government, which was the invisible hand behind a lot of this in the first place. And so that's why I ran for president.
Well, it's funny because whenever you reference like the Black Lives Matter thing, I feel like I, at least in my experience, feel like there are a lot of people who got duped by all of that. I mean, it's nonsense, right? It's meaningless virtue signaling. That's what all of that stuff is. And it's kind of thrust upon us and forced upon us by these certain entities and these, this larger kind of cancer that has taken root in our society. I kind of think, Vivek, a lot of people who maybe fell for that a while ago have realized how ridiculous and pointless all of that stuff is. Where do you think we stand from the time that you and I spoke? Because it was maybe, like you said, 3 years ago or so. Things I hope are trending in the right direction, at least people being able to recognize it.
Yeah, I think we are in a different place. And so I'll give you my diagnosis, Lara, is that what really happened with a lot of the woke infection was it was a cover-up job for the failure of institutions that had actually taken a lot of criticism from the left. So this is, maybe scratching beneath the surface a little bit, but you asked, and I think it's important to see. So if you take the military, the hit on the military used to come from the left for the Iraq War, or at least much of the left used to criticize the Iraq War or the overstay in place in the Middle East where we shouldn't have been. And so what does the military do? It says, okay, no, don't worry, guys. You on the left, we'll say the things that you want us to say. General Mark Milley or whoever can talk about systemic rage, systemic racism, or white rage. But just don't criticize me anymore if I'm saying the magic words that you want me to say. It's what you call woke smoke. It's what you saw in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. You have the bailouts that came from the Bush administration, by the way, the same one that got us into the Iraq War. The government bailouts to the banks, the left did not like that very much. That's why you got Occupy Wall Street. But then you got the big banks and financial institutions saying, we'll talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, ESG, and climate change as we fly on, our private jet to a mountaintop in Davos to muse about climate change. But we'll say all of those things you want us to say as long as Occupy Wall Street goes away and you leave us alone. Silicon Valley, the old version of breakup big tech, used to come from the left. But what they said is, you know what, we'll use our own monopoly power to censor the hate speech and misinformation as you on the left define it, as long as you guys shut up and stay out of our way. And so that's what happened initially is actually many on the left and many, across the country fell for that trick. It was woke smoke, as I call it, right? But now that woke smoke has cleared a little bit. That's passed. And what we see is the institutions that were using that woke smoke are really rotten at their own core. I mean, public education, you have a bunch of school teachers that failed to teach kids how to do math for 2 years. They tried to say math is racist as a deflection. Once people get over that, they see, okay, well, our public schools are still broken. Our higher education is still overpriced. Our military has still abandoned its core and central purpose of defending the American homeland. Wall Street institutions and banks have engaged in crony capitalism that have left their own customers even worse off as they've adopted ESG dogmas that do the government's bidding through the back door. And so where I think we are, anyway, it's a long-winded answer to your question. But
no, I loved it. You're so right, and I love hearing the way that you describe it because you break it down, you make it very digestible for people. Go ahead.
Yes, so I think we're compared to when you and I sat down 3 years ago. Back then, everybody was still falling for a lot of the woke smoke.
Right.
Where we are now is the smoke has cleared, but sort of the tide retreats. You see the detritus that sits underneath it. Our universities, our companies, financial institutions, government agencies, nonprofits, every one of these institutions, our military, has lost its purpose for a long time. I think that's a 20-year affair. The woke smoke that they used to cover it up, people fell for that for a while. Now that's past. What's the work ahead of us is actually to restore that sense of purpose to each of our institutions that have abandoned that sense of purpose, be it our government, a government that we, the people, create a government that is accountable to us, not the other way around. That's what we've forgotten. But it's not just our government. It goes for nonprofit institutions to universities to really every institution in our public school system that needs to rediscover its sense of purpose now that the woke game has passed. And this is where I don't want the conservative movement to fall for the trap of using the anti-woke response as a way of covering up what we actually stand for as well, which is a revival of the actual purpose of each of those institutions. And so, the left is going to continue to try to bring back race, gender, sexuality, and climate. And what I would like us to do more of is not just call that hypocrisy out for what it is. I've done that. Most of us have done some of that over the last several years. But to offer our own alternative vision of what do we actually stand for as a nation, or even pick at the level of a university or at the level of a company, what do we actually stand for? And I think that involves more than just seeing through the woke smoke that I think is now, thankfully, due to the efforts of many good patriots across this country. Now that that's cleared, we have the harder work ahead of defining the affirmative values that we actually stand for. And the more we do that, the more likely we are to succeed in getting our country back.
Well, and that's the name of the game, right, Vivek? We got to get this country back. I mean, things are in such a bad spot right now for so many people. Obviously, you ran for president. That is not a small decision to make. It involves your entire family in many ways. Whenever you decide to do this, believe me, no one knows better than those in the Trump family. We went into this as a family, and my father-in-law did, with pretty much zero political experience. What surprised you the most whenever you decided you were going to go for it, run for president? You were very successful, Vivek. For someone who honestly kind of came out of nowhere, I think you surprised a lot of people.
Yeah, look, I'm grateful for the patriots we met across this country, probably tens of thousands of people, just face to face, that I interacted with over the course of this campaign, not through a social media algorithm, not through a TV screen, but in person, tens of thousands of people who care about this country. That's what gave me my sense of energy and purpose through the whole thing. I'll share a couple things with you. I mean, some of these things, it's like, how could you not have thought this? But I knew it to be true, but I really know it to be true now. Is the influence of mega money on politics, I think, is toxic, but is real. And the sad part of it is, you know what, if you're not playing that game, and I chose not to play that game, but you're at a competitive disadvantage when the puppet masters, frankly, in both parties, are really calling the shots. And it takes someone like myself, or, at a successful scale like your father-in-law, who's independent of that system, to be able to actually challenge it. But I think that's the number one learning, is that most politicians are puppets. It's not even their fault. I'm not mad at them. I think it's just the reality. The donor class, the powers that be in the Republican establishment, the Democratic establishment alike, view most politicians as pawns on a chessboard. I think even Biden fits that description. His cognitive deficits are not a bug to the people who control him. They're a feature, actually.
Right.
It allows you to be more controlled. And I think that if you look at a lot of the other candidates, I'm glad that people found me to be spontaneous or whatever, but they say, why aren't the other candidates behaving that way? It's not their fault. It's the way the system works, because they don't have the leash to do it when money's the mother's milk of politics. And so I think that's one of the learnings. I think one of the learnings is, and again, like what a fool I must have been for this to be a learning. But I knew this to be true, but you really only know it to be true after you see it, is the dishonesty of most of the corporate media, full stop. And I think that that's something that, of course, you know it, but until you really see it up close, like I have to be honest, when, President Trump used to talk about the fake news media or the fake news, it's like, okay, well, is really all of the news fake news? I guess I kind of get where he's coming from at this point. You literally understand how pervasive this is. It's not one network. It's a repeated game theory of a game of distortion that's not designed to make the people see what's true, but to actually prevent the people from seeing what's true. And it comes from this. One of the things I learned, Lara, is the people who do it, I think they don't think of themselves as having a nefarious intention. They don't think of themselves as doing something bad. They think they're doing something out of the benevolence of their own grander kindness, to understand that the ordinary people of this country, they can't handle the truth if you actually serve it up to them. So we have to serve them a sanitized version of the truth, because that's what's in their own best interest. And I think that's one of the things I learned. Both, I think it goes for the mega donor class. I think it goes for a lot of the government bureaucrats. I think it goes for the mainstream media establishment, is that their belief is they have to lie to the people, or they don't view it as even a lie, but have to serve as a filter of what truth makes it to the people, because otherwise the people themselves couldn't actually handle it. Yeah. Right? Just like the Jack Nicholson character from A Few Good Men, right? You can't handle the truth. And I think that's the basic thing that, even as somebody who is skeptical of a lot of those media institutions or intermediary gatekeepers, I think sometimes we fall into the trap of saying, oh, these people are out to screw us. I think if it's even more devious and dangerous than that. It's not that they view themselves as trying to screw you. It's that they view themselves as playing the role of a hero, right? A tragic hero that has to make sure that they serve as a gatekeeper between what the public can and can't consume. And so I made it my project for much of this race to take not a chisel, but a chainsaw to that apparatus, to break that, to expose it at whatever cost. And at a certain point in the race, I said, you know what, I would rather speak the truth and lose resoundingly than to win by playing some fake game of political snakes and ladders. And that eventually became my project, and said, you know what, I'm going to tell the people who I am, what I stand for. I'm going to be unsparing in exposing what needs to be exposed at every step of the way. The deeper we went into the debate cycle, the more I just unshackled myself to be able to expose anyone from the establishment of the Republican Party to the establishment of the Democratic Party, to even the mainstream media moderators who were staring us in the face, lying to the American people through their teeth for the last 5 years, from the Russia collusion hoax to the Hunter Biden laptop, to the origin of COVID, to the failure of Ronna McDaniel's leadership of the Republican Party, to how our money's being spent in Ukraine. At a certain point, you said, you know what, what's the point of playing within the game of these filters? Let's actually just take the filters off, take a baseball bat to the whole thing and see what happens. And I think it was in those last few months that they really, I would say, then started coming for me. And I think your family knows exactly what that's all about, but we got a small taste of what that looks like in the later phases of this campaign. But I would say that's also what made it rewarding, because what's the point of going through the motions? I don't think the system needs another stuffed suit of a politician to recite the, establishment approved slogans, even from the RNC or otherwise. I don't think the system needs one more of those. But I think the system, I hope, did benefit from somebody who's maybe a little bit unlike the others on that debate stage. And one of the things I also would have done differently if I were to do it again was, I have this mentality, and I probably picked it up from a young age. My parents are immigrants. They came to this country with no money. They always taught us, work hard, work your tail off, and that's the way you get ahead. And so, be it in school or in academics or in my business career, that was my philosophy. It's also how I approached the campaign. But I think that if I was to do this again, I would have built in much more time rather than just running at 160 miles an hour the whole time from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., to build in a little bit more time to see, I would say, the traps that existing establishment lays for you. And when you're going 160 miles and say, I'll talk to any media at all time, we're going to do any event, no matter how small or how big, it leaves a little bit less time to see some of the, I would say, the traps that we could talk about the individual instances from the CNN to the Atlantic to whatever, small stuff in the scheme of things, but learnings is what I count it as. Is learnings of intentional traps that are laid that if I was to do it again, or the advice I would give to somebody who was in my shoes, given the try of doing something like this, is yes, you have to work hard and work your tail off, but leave a little bit of time to also separate the forest from the trees to see the traps that system lays for an anti-establishment candidate. That would be the advice that I would give the version of myself from a year ago if, I would have done it all over again.
Yeah. I love your take on it, because and what you said about the media, I think is very relatable, certainly to those of us in our family. Until these things happen to you, you can hear it and kind of appreciate it, but you can't really understand it. And they are traps, Vivek. There's no doubt about it. These people are, it's kind of crazy, because I almost feel like, you talk about woke stuff, people are kind of asleep in some sense because they don't realize any of this is going on. But once you're awake and once you see it and you realize it, it's crazy, but it is happening. And it's kind of terrifying. You just brought up the debates. You were one of the most fun people to watch on a debate stage. I got to say it. I mean, I loved hearing everything that came out of your mouth. I thought it was so entertaining, and you were so spot on. I want to ask you about that on the other side of this commercial break. Nobody move. All right. I hate to interrupt the show, but our country is facing so many problems these days under Joe Biden. The last thing any of us needs is more to worry about. Unfortunately, we now have to fear losing our freedom and privacy with the Democrats' new push for a digital dollar that could allow the government to tell us what we can and cannot buy with our hard-earned money. That's why I'm encouraging every one of you tuning in to the show tonight to get The Secret War on Cash, an insightful report created by my friends at Swiss America. With this report, you'll learn how to protect yourself from the threats facing our freedom and your hard-earned money. The report is now available to my listeners free of charge. Just call 800-289-2646 or visit www.swissamerica.com/Trump for your free report. All right, watching the debates, Vivek, it was like you came very prepared, certainly. I think even more so than the career politicians. You just talked about how you were kind of just leaving it all out there. You really didn't care what the consequences were. Did you go into those debates knowing that like on the other side you were going to really make a name for yourself? Because I think that's where you really shine too.
Yeah, I mean, I made a decision. So there was one of the four debates that I did. The second debate where I tried to, just kind of play within the boundaries of the norms that were set. And that one wasn't any fun. So the first one I had fun with. Number 3, number 4, I had a lot of fun with. And so I kind of made the decision, and from then on, even in the campaign, that I'm just going to be pretty unshackled. I'm going to be unrestrained. I don't really care if the people around me don't necessarily like the way I have to say something. I'm going to say it in what I believe is the truest way that reflects my convictions. And I think it revealed, a deep dividing line in our GOP between the Dick Cheney party of yesteryear, and there were other candidates on that stage who were, I think, modern avatars of that old curse of the Republican Party. And I think where our party ought to go to the future, which is a party and a movement beyond just a political party that says the people we elect to run the government should run the government, not unelected bureaucrats. And they owe a moral duty to the citizens of this country, not any other one. And I think your father-in-law did a fantastic job of beginning that, reviving that movement, I would say, in 2016. Mm-hmm. I didn't say beginning because it began in 1776, but it was certainly revived in 2016.
Yeah.
And certainly, I was the only person on that debate stage representing that viewpoint. And so I felt a special sense of responsibility to really call out some of that underbelly of I would say even an ugly corruption in the professional politics of the Republican Party included. And so I just decided I was going to be unshackled. And one learning that I had from that, though, Lara, is that for the people who actually watched the debates, they saw one thing, right? And form your own conclusions. But if you watch the debates, you know what you saw. It turns out that's a tiny fraction of the total populace. And what some of the other candidates realized, some in particular, was that the audience was not the electorate. The audience is not your voters. Forget the voters. Forget the GOP primary voters. They have nothing to do with it. The audience is the gatekeepers to those GOP primary voters. So certain people, I would say, I think I may have been the only candidate on that stage that said, you know what, my audience and the people I'm responsive to here are the voters, GOP primary voters, and specifically, we'll get to the general election later. But the GOP primary voters are the audience for the GOP primary debates. That was my naive view. And certainly that's the way I probably had the most fun along the way of being unshackled, because I think that's what a lot of our voters want to see is authenticity.
Right.
But I think what some of the other candidates recognized is that their audience was not the GOP primary voter base. To them, that really didn't matter. It was the donor class. How can I actually perform for the people who are going to provide the mother's milk that keeps my campaign sustained? And the mainstream media, which is actually going to serve as a filter and a gatekeeper to describe what happened on the stage to the many tens of millions of people more who didn't watch it than those who actually did. And so you could look at like a page of the New York Times or the Washington Post or whatever describing what happened on the debate stage versus somebody who actually watched it. You would have thought you watched two completely different events.
Yep.
And I'm saying this more with a laugh than any sense of irritation or a gripe, but it was one of these learnings. It was like, oh, I think some of those other candidates, right, the Nikki Haley's of the world, realized that they're performing for a very different audience that represents 0.0001% of the total people in this country that sit in the mainstream media and sit in the Republican Party donor establishment. And if that's who you're performing for, the way you perform as a circus monkey or whatever is very different than the way that you perform if you're just sharing your thoughts to the people who you think of as your voters. And so it was very funny because there was almost two different games going on at the same time. And I think each of us won the respective games that we were playing. It just turns out there were two very different games at the same time.
Success on both ends. It's funny. I've talked about this before, and I spoke at the Republican National Convention in 2020, and I used this in my speech. When I was in 7th grade, I had an English teacher, and for whatever reason, she made us all learn, and she would say it every day when we repeat it every day, this phrase, and it was, believe none of what you hear, half of what you read, and only what you are there to witness firsthand. And I never really, Vivek, appreciated the meaning and the depth of it, honestly.
That's a great teacher right there.
In 7th grade English class.
I'm actually literally gonna just like I love that.
It's great, but it's so true.
Wait, say it again?
And believe none of what you hear, half of what you read, and only what you are there to witness firsthand. And I'll tell you, when we were, I mean, when my father-in-law was in the White House, when he was running for president the first time, heck, when he was running for president the second, and now the third time, this is something that really came back to me, and I understand fully what it means. And if more people actually abided by that, then I think that the world would be, quite frankly, a much better place. So I appreciate all the things that you just said there. People are very interested in you, though, and they want to know what's next for you. Would you run for office again? Will you be potentially taking a cabinet position, potentially throwing your hat in the ring for VP? What is next for Vivek Ramaswamy?
So look, I think that a lot of those questions start with less with me and more with what's best for the country. And the person who we put in charge of answering that question is the next U.S. president, who I am 100% committed, 150% all in to make sure that's going to be Donald Trump. I think it will be.
Amen.
I think that it's not to be taken for granted. I think it's going to take, there's going to be a lot of traps laid over the course of this year. One of the things I found, Lara, is that if you see a pernicious problem brewing, the best thing you can do is to name it. And that actually stops it from at least playing out surreptitiously. So I think there's probably a lot of traps that are still yet going to be laid this year. But one of the things that I view as my responsibility to do, and I've done my best at it and will continue to this year, is to name what those lurking traps that have been laid are, to make sure that we don't fall as a movement into any of them, and that Donald Trump is the next president of the United States. The 45th president becomes the 47th president. And I want him to be as successful as he can be. And I think one of the things I know from being an executive is that you've got to make those decisions yourself, right? What is your vision? The people have elected you because they're behind your vision. So I'm at this stage all in to make sure that he's going to be the person implementing that vision. And for what the administration looks like, that should be one person's decision, and that's his decision. So, I'm going to be as helpful as I can in making sure he's elected, and then that's going to be his decision of how he wants to run the country. And I'm there to be as helpful as I can in whatever way I can. Now, there's a lot of ways to drive change in this country, both within government and outside government. Even before I ran, I was a big advocate of driving change through the market. That's why I founded Strive, which competes against BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard by offering market alternatives. I think my own front row seat to the corruption of the media has given me certainly some ideas on ways in which the media needs to be held accountable, perhaps through competition, perhaps otherwise. There's others doing that, but maybe not in the fullest extent that it could be done. And so, this country has been beyond, I think, kind to my family and our journey. My parents came here with no money. I founded multi-billion-dollar companies. My wife is a surgeon saving lives every day, following her passion. We're raising our 2 kids in Central Ohio. So I'm at a phase of my life where this is all about what can we do for our country. This country has done enough and then some for us beyond a scale that my parents could have ever imagined. And so my number one question is, what is the number one impact that I can have on this country? And if that's through government, great, let it be through government. And if it's outside the government, in the meantime, I think that's going to be outside of government, philanthropically, through the private sector, through, frankly, speaking out and naming the problems that otherwise might be lurking beneath the surface. All of those things are important. But right now, my focus is making sure that your father-in-law gets elected as the next president, that he's set up for success, and that, he deserves to run the country in the way that he seeks to. And I'm going to be there to help support that in whatever way I can.
I got to tell you, love having you on the team. I think you're fantastic. You're such an asset, I think, to the team, and I really do mean that. And congratulations, because I think if nothing else, Vivek, you really got a lot of energy behind you, and you really opened a lot of people's eyes. In much the same way I think that my father-in-law did in 2016, and I think we need more of that. I love the kind of new up and coming people who aren't afraid to act outside of the bounds of what is set in place. And really you shake things up. And I think that's always a good thing. We're going to go and we're going to work hard. And I'll tell you, Eric and I will be there every step of the way, right beside you, fighting the good fight. What do you predict, though, for the rest? I mean, you talked about the traps being laid just before we let you go. Prediction for come November 5th, 2024. I don't even believe it's going to be Joe Biden, quite frankly, that Donald Trump is running against. What do you think's about to happen? This is about to get crazy, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, it made a lot of people even in our own movement uncomfortable when I said this, but that's precisely why I said it, because the more likely you are to name the problem, the less likely it is to actually happen. So the first thing I said, and I stand by it, is I think there was an establishment plot, you could call it that, a desire to narrow this down to a two-horse race in the GOP primary between Donald Trump and a puppet who they can control. In that case, that was Nikki Haley. Mm-hmm. And to eliminate him from the ballot in one way or another to be able to trot their puppet in. I think it's beyond weird. I don't think it's like a little bit weird. I think it's beyond weird that Nikki Haley's not even competing for delegates in Nevada. So she's not competing for delegates.
Crazy.
Well, that tells you exactly something about if you're not planning to win by collecting delegates, then how exactly are you planning to win?
How are you going to win? Yeah.
Exactly. And then you double click on that and say some of the people who are propping her up, the largest backers, are the very people who are also backing the lawsuits against Donald Trump and the efforts to keep him off the ballot. And you're not collecting delegates, but you're still staying in the race. I wonder what's happening there. So if you don't name that problem, it becomes a lot easier for people to advance it. So one of the things is I said that for a long time. In fact, I viewed that as a vital part of the late part of the candidacy for me to be able to have pointed that out. It made some of people in our own movement uncomfortable, upset when I said it, but I stand by it. And on the flip side, I've done everything I can to prevent that from happening. Part of why I dropped out after Iowa. I got about 8% of the vote in Iowa. I think I was about to get 8% in New Hampshire. But I think it was critical that New Hampshire was a decisive victory, and it absolutely was. And I think that thankfully, for all intents and purposes, I think the GOP primary is now practically over. And I think everyone's going to have to admit that very soon, if not already. So now the same people and the same kind of establishment that tried to prop up their puppet within the Republican Party, having failed at that, is going to do the same thing with the Democratic Party, where the Biden brand is a little bit tarnished. So they're going to find another puppet who is going to be a little bit more useful to advance their interest than Joe Biden himself. And so I think they're going to wait until things, the plot thickens until the spring, try to use these lawsuits or whatever to try to achieve whatever advantage they can, see how some of those play out. They don't know exactly how that's going to play out in the Supreme Court or otherwise, but watch how that plays out and then pick the ideal puppet for that scenario. Your guess is as good as mine who they could pick. I think that we could all make educated guesses. I think it's unlikely once the plan number one didn't work out within the Republican primary. I think they're going to turn to plan number two, which is somebody else who's going to be within the Democratic Party other than Joe Biden. And I don't think it's going to be Kamala Harris. I think that they've made some dumb decisions, but I don't think they're going to be that dumb about it. I think they're going to actually probably be very smart about it. Yeah, and I think that Gavin Newsom is where they're trying to deflect attention, which tells me that it's probably not going to be Gavin Newsom, it'd be somebody else. I think you take a long, hard look at what Michelle Obama may be saying on a given day, and I think that's something to keep an eye on. Mm-hmm. But whatever it is, I think they're going to find another puppet to trot out in the Democratic Party, and if that doesn't play out, it's going to be the next thing all the way through November. And so I think we have to stay vigilant on that through the very end. But the flip side is, Lara, I see an opportunity for us, and I'm going to say us because we're all doing this, we're all on the same team doing this together to make sure that not only do we win this election, we win this in a Reagan 1980 style landslide. And one of the things I think we ought to do, it's not as a trick, it's as something that's grounded in truth, actually, is to own the message of national unity, actually. To say that, you know what, Joe Biden ran on national unity, that was fake. But to make America great again, the number one way we're going to do that is actually to be one nation again. Black or white, Democrat or Republican, gay or straight, man or woman, it doesn't matter. We agree on certain basic principles that set this country into motion in 1776. And that even for our side to say that, you know what, even if you disagree with what we have to say, we will still stand to the very end for your right to say it, which is different than what the other side is saying today. That even if you disagree with us on some things from the south side of Chicago to the inner city of Boston or New York or Kensington, Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, we all agree that we should prioritize the citizens of this nation over another one, that a nation without borders is not a nation, that you shouldn't be converting South Shore High School on the south side of Chicago into an encampment for migrants, and Black Americans in the inner city of Chicago who have rightly asked, what the heck about me, that they do have a point. And America First, even if the historical Republican Party didn't have something to say about that, the America First movement of today does. That we would sooner protect our own border than to protect somebody else's border halfway around the world in Ukraine. Those are principles that unite all of us as Americans, from George Washington all the way to Donald Trump in the present. And you know what? They might preach the words of national unity, but we're the ones in this to actually unite the country. Yes, we will make America great again, but we will do it by making America one nation under God again, with an emphasis on one nation. If we own that message earnestly, not as some kind of, I would say, this will turn the mainstream media's narrative of the race upside down. But it's not just as a move to call them out for their latent hypocrisy and to enjoy them twisting their tongue into knots, not knowing what to do with it. That'll be fun, but that's not why I'm saying it. I'm saying it because it's true. Right. I think that's what actually MAGA and the America First movement is really grounded in, is one nation undergirded by a common set of foundational values that we set into motion in 1776. And if we own that message and recapture that message of national unity, I think that we can win this not by a little bit, but by a lot. And I think it has to be a lot.
Yeah.
I think a landslide minus some shenanigans is still a decisive victory. And that's what we're going to need to reunite this country and then restore single day voting on election day with paper ballots and government issued ID as a national holiday. We're only going to get there with a decisive win in the meantime. And so anyway, can I predict exactly what's going to happen? No. Is it going to be exactly what we expect? It's definitely not. We have to stay vigilant to the traps that have been laid, but make sure we win this in that landslide. And I will do everything in my power, as I know you and Eric will too, to make sure that that's the result that we actually do get. And I'm cautiously optimistic, Lara, that that's exactly what we're going to see.
I'm just going to say amen, because I everything you just said, Vivek, incredible. Couldn't agree more. Spot on. And let's go get them on to November 5th. We're going to go do it. We're going to work hard. Thank you for your time tonight. But honestly, thank you for everything that you've done and continue to do for this country, because, you know, we really are so blessed to live in the greatest country on the face of God's green earth. And I'm proud to be an American. And I think we're going to bring that back. I love all of it. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for all you do, Vivek. And to everybody at home, as always, thank you for tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, and follow. We'll see you back here next time for more of The Right View.
And I won't back down. Hey, baby, there ain't no easy way out.
Nothing is worse than being on a phone call that drops. Nothing is worse than trying to text someone and you can't reach them because your phone is out of service range. And nothing is worse than supporting these major corporations and companies who don't support us. That is why I love Patriot Mobile. They are America's only Christian conservative wireless network. They use every cell tower out there available to all networks so that they have the greatest 4G and 5G coverage nationwide. And they support the causes that are important to us as conservatives. If you go today to patriotmobile.com/Lara Trump and use the promo code Trump, you will get free activation today. Again, that is patriotmobile.com/Lara Trump. The promo code is Trump for free activation so that you can get a great cell plan and feel good about doing it. My name is Lara Trump, and I think Mike Lindell is a patriot. He is someone who loves this country, is willing to fight for this country. If you go to mypillow.com today and use promo code Trump, again, promo code Trump, you will not only save money, but you will help us continue this show and other shows like it and help us continue the fight for the future of America.